Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Alyssa Rege, an assistant editor with Becker's Hospital Review. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end for a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled Enter a Question for Staff and clicking Send. We are looking forward to hearing your questions. Also in today's webinar, we will have a poll question for the audience. The poll question will pop up directly on your screen, and then you can select your answer from the options and click Submit. Additionally, in about a week following the webinar, we will be sending you a copy of the presentation to the email you used to register. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's presenters. Claire Riley is currently the Clinical Workflow Specialist at Impedes, where she advises on the clinical practice of healthcare IT security. She trained at the Peterborough and Stanford School of Nursing in the United Kingdom, and then pursued her Master's in Health Informatics, Upper Merit, at the University of Central Lancashire in the United Kingdom. Claire has over 25 years of experience in the healthcare industry as an emergency room nurse. She's practiced in the UK, the Middle East, and the US, including in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bermuda, and Massachusetts. Christopher McKay is the Director of Nursing at Impedes and has 20+ years of extensive emergency medicine experience. In addition to his work at Impedes, he is a practicing clinician at Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital in Needham, Massachusetts. Nurse McKay serves as a resource nurse, helping to train staff on topics from computers to trauma care. He also worked for 10 years at Beth Israel Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts, a Level 1 trauma center and academic teaching hospital, as well as at 4 other Boston area hospitals. Nurse McKay is trained by Homeland Security and maintains his FEMA HERT instructor certification. At this time, I will now turn the floor over to Claire Riley.
Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everybody out there. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon or today. Christopher and I would like to talk about the nurses count clicks too. In terms of, we are important, we do bring value to the work floor, and we want to talk about nurses' value in measuring those clicks account as well, which is what led us to wanting to pursue this webinar with you guys and talk about new technology that does impede specifically on nursing clinical productivity. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we'd like to talk about the interoperability and point of care workflows, regulatory drivers for device security, security's impact on clinical efficiency, and clinical workflow variability. Next slide, please. So let's start with the interoperability within healthcare and actually improving those points of care workflows. And I'm going to hand to my colleague, Christopher, who will talk us through this. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Claire. As far as interoperability, we can start with the next slide. We really want to look at the expansion overall, and certainly these are new to a lot of the marketplaces. As these become more smart devices become able and willing in the field, we really need to start looking at some of the security around it and what's really driving it. Once we have that interoperability and real-time visibility, we really need to clamp down and see, as long as it's making it accessible as well as usable for the nurses. There's certainly a need to streamline these workflows when we're working at the bedside, and we need to make sure that we are thinking about efficiency and mobility at all points. You can see that there's a pretty big market growth here at 26% over the next 3 years. So we're really looking to expand in this area. Next slide. So we are going to start with the poll question. What workflows can you see the most impacted by technology barriers today? And I want you to kind of open your mind to this, because is it really one, or it could be more? Again, I just want you to think about the top one you can select for now. But certainly it can encompass mobile devices, and we'll talk a little bit about those, whether it's a handheld device or whether it's a phone that you carry, whether you're transmitting data back to the EMR, whether that's via a pump or a current handheld mobility. the workstation itself to other endpoints. There's a lot of choices here to think about, and think about how that technology impacts you and what's really stopping you from doing that day-to-day process, because that's what we want to look at, because this is your webinar to really look at what is impacting you. We know as clinicians, we're counting clicks all the time too. We want to see where your barriers are so we can best help the workflow. So I'm going to give you a few moments there as we click in through there, and we can see some of the answers here in data entry and navigation within the EMR. So really just the biggest barrier at 62%, and it's a pretty big chunk of the data right there, is looking at getting the entry and navigating within the EMR. So one of the solutions we talk about is really getting that badge access to eliminate some of that barrier. We realize how many times you sign in during the course of a day. So certainly we're going to look at some of those. We went back with their first slide there. Can we forward to the next one? So let's look at each one of these, and we'll do a deeper dive. In the state of device security, top concerns, some of the challenges that we see and we face day to day, as well as what you do. And again, at the end, we're hoping that you have some questions and share with us some of these problems and concerns you have, so that we can start developing and helping solve some of those problems and challenges you have. Next slide, please. So our clinical concerns here, we reformatted PHI on the device. And again, this you guys may not be aware of even simple things like a vital sign machine having PHI data on it. This is something new to all of us, and there's some regulations and regulatory pieces around it. Anything that has some of the PHI, you need to be worried about as far as an entry point. Device reprogramming, again, some more concerns. Anything that can bring that offline through a cyber attack. We've seen a lot of people are unaware that these open-ended devices are sitting there and are just prime targets for cybersecurity. And clearly, there's obviously the patient's safety concern for automated clinical decision-making and support. Those are what the clinicians see as far as some of the problems, and we really look at, some of the IT concerns. What are they trying to do? They're trying to lock down everything, and again, try to put up some barriers. And we understand that, because you've answered 62% of them that's the toughest challenge, is to get through that. So we need to make sure that's smooth and seamless as we get through it. Claire, as far as some of the concerns clinician-wise, did you want to add some more in there?
No, I think just to reiterate, Chris, and I say this all the time, security, of course, we know is leading the way around the world in every business. But as a end user, as a emergency nurse, my prime need and ask, and it was nice to see that data response, is access into the EMR. I need to be able to get into my job, be efficient, whether it's the EMR, whether it's the vital signs machine, whether it's the IV pump. So I think it's important to realize that end users, we recognize the security and value that needs to come in line, but it's also nice to see that IT and security are now starting to work hand in hand with end users, so that we can drive those agreements, address those issues that we have, and allow clinicians to value the security component and what the risk places are here.
Great point, Claire. And that's some of the concerns you see here on the IT side of it that have to kind of fit with the clinical side of it. They need to make sure that they are making sure that they're properly disposing of PHI, making sure that that data integrity and accuracy is who it is that's saying that's entering those, whether it be vital signs from a machine, whether it be a pump being documented on the EMR side of it, that data integrity is there, that there is the person that's actually entering that is the person that they're aware of, and that there is some truth behind that. What that does when you have that perfect mesh is that gives you the confidentiality, the integrity, all interwoven. And really, that's when security and safety really meets that the crossroads there. And that's what we're aiming for, is hitting on some of these top concerns and really making sure that we can tackle some of these. Next slide, please. So here you can see there's a small white paper. This is available for download as well. We mentioned this is from the Human Health and Services Physicians HIPAA compliance device. Now, I'm sure you guys all want to read a 685-page document. So we have summarized it here because this does highlight some of the things. It really looks at some of the simple things like privacy screening, just reduce access to different areas, other physical security controls that we have there. So we do have a kind of a current state of what is the best practice. Now, I'll be honest with you, clinicians will have their best practice, and then the lawyers in the companies will have their best practice. So in between there, we need to find the balance. We do need to look at what is not just best practice because it's easy, but best practice because it's safe for you, the hospital, and the patient. So that's really the guide of what we're trying to look for, is try to, with minimal regulations for healthcare systems, really imposing what has to be done so that it still becomes efficient. And where to focus that is really what we think is having strong authentication to get into the EMR. Again, given that ease of access, it's affecting, as we mentioned earlier, 62% of you, as well as that if required, a two-factor authentication for stricter security. Make it again seamless, whether that be a token, whether it be a fingerprint. Either one of those is really what we're challenging to our focus around, and establishing the trust, if you will, between the technology and the information. Claire, do you see any other real drivers here that you want to mention?
No, I think, again, this talks to driving home the importance of security needs now within the healthcare. And to be very honest, as you well know, Chris, you've been practicing as long as I have, as I'm sure many of you that are registered here today. There were three different avenues: clinical usage, IT delivering, and security has now come up and is leading the way. So we need to find a harmonious way to work together, and clinicians will always navigate and circumvent and shortcut any workflow that is put into place by these guys and gals. So we need to find a harmonious place to work together. And I think, as we travel internationally, both Christopher and I, we are seeing much stronger and developing relationships happening between these three bodies, which is the huge way forward for clinicians to become engaged in establishing and acknowledging that security need within healthcare. And I just wanted to add, before you move on, Chris, as you say, white papers, we don't want to be reading them forever. But this white paper from Interoperability, everybody that's registered today will be receiving a copy of this in their email after the webinar. So you can take it away, and any questions, there's a go-to email to reach out to us that we can discuss further if you would like to.
That's a great point, Claire. And this is the short read, opposed to the interim rules and some of the HIPAA violation rules that they've had out that is 680 pages. We've really summarized it in a nice, concise, couple-page document that really is helpful and answers some of those security questions. Great. So let's look at some of the barriers to efficiency. So really what you guys have identified already is that username and password. I have to say, when I first started working for this company 5 years ago, they said we sign in 20, 25 times a shift, and I'm like, I honestly had to call BS on that. I didn't think that was an accurate number. I thought it didn't seem like that much to me. So I actually took a stopwatch and set a clicker and brought it in and started clicking how many times in a 12-hour shift. Well, I was surprised when I got to 72 that how many times I kind of blocked it out, and how much we do workarounds and sign in all the time. And that 20 to 25 is actually very conservative in the scheme of things. Some of the EMRs with quicker timeouts, with dashboards involved, I was signing in between that, X-rays and lab results. That's where I started totaling all of 72 times in a 12-hour shift. I find that to be a little bit staggering when we pause and look at it for a moment. But it is one of the biggest barriers we have. And again, it's a username and password that keeps getting more complex. I mean, the security now wants to do 10, 12 digits with, asterisks and capitals and small letters. And these are all for the right reasons. They're trying to tighten up security, but they're making it a challenge to us. So again, having that identification in a badge tap that changes when you simply just touch it to the reader is very effective for us. And really, it eliminates some of those security risks and gives that integrity that we talked about. Claire, would you say that you sign in at least 50 times a shift when you were doing it, now that we have the data?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add on to that, Chris. This slide here actually talks to providers authenticating into devices 20, 25 times a shift. We all know, we don't need to go into it for everybody that's registered, but there's the EMR. When we talk devices, excuse me, it depends where you work. You know, in a busy emergency room, it's multiple devices, ventilators, pumps, vital signs machines. You get onto the intensive care units, you get into the OR. So that number on here is probably a conservative number, but Chris and I, we are a team of 4, and we always want to hear from clinicians like ourselves of calling us out on these numbers. When you see them in the white papers, if you want to challenge and talk about a specific area and the number of times that you click in, as Chris alluded to earlier, we know that walking around on the floor is much, much more overall when you look at the actual devices, desktop, laptops that we have to tap into. So you get that single sign-on, authenticating to your desktop, into your EMR, anything you have to do in your desktop, and then your devices. We're talking multiple time savings in an 8 or 12-hour shift, times the weeks, times the months, and it's a large number. Great
point, Claire. Thank you. I have to say that one thing that is starting to take a little bit of a forefront is some of the mobile devices, the handhelds that they're going around. It started when they just linked the EMR to it, but now that they can start adding different software on some of these devices and do barcode scannings, we're seeing a big surge in the marketplace for these mobile devices, and lo and behold, you need to sign into those as well. So we're just seeing an increase in these numbers, so we really need to force the efficiency wherever you enter so that you can get that same continuity and ease of care. So what are some of the actual security workarounds that we've seen in the field? I've seen a lot, so we chuckled at which ones we were going to share or not, because we had thought a little bit long and hard about this. Traditionally, I mean, the classic is basically looking on the back of everyone's ID badge, and they've had not only the password that they currently have, but probably the last 3 or 4 passwords, because they just keep crossing them out. We've seen them on PACS machines, underneath keyboards. I do think the one that I like to share is the one that they had everything written down right next to the phone in the radiology room, and they had all of the passwords and the extensions written down. Claire, do you remember what happened when they painted that room?
Yeah, I thought that's the one you were referring to. Yeah, they all came back in on Monday morning, and nobody knew a password, or they barely knew their username to get in, and even those are shared. Yeah, there's multiple areas, and I'm sure yourselves, you get creative. And, there's that tag team approach. One of us goes on, another one comes in, and it just stays open the entire time. And I truly believe, my hand on my heart, the healthcare is not a malicious industry. The reason this happens is because we need to get in, we're fast moving, it needs to be efficient, and my brain's already moving on to the next task. So if we can make it convenient, then that streamlines for end users and takes away all of the bad habits that we have almost been forced to adopt so that we can get all of our tasks done within our time frames.
Yeah, I do have to say that we are notorious for workarounds. And again, to your point, it's only because we're trying to give good patient care. So the best answer and certainly the best practice we like to bring forward is that if you can eliminate that barrier and give that efficiency, then you're going to achieve both. So that's really our goal here is to start eliminating some of those clicks, eliminating some of the access to whether it be a device on there or not. All right, let's move on to the next slide. This is a little busy slide, but I want to take a time to look at some of this. Certainly when we're looking at the password, credential, and sharing, as Claire alluded to, people certainly will just leave it logged in. When we see PAX machines, that's the classic. They just leave it logged in all day. These things that can arise. What the problem that can arise from it too is the back end of it. Leaving that open there leaves you open to some other problems, like an audit issue or the data integrity. I mentioned earlier, if you're not the person signing into the device and sending it into the EMR, then you have no real claim to that data. Now, when you see them lifted wide open and there's no security settings on it, and maybe Chris McKay is the hardest working nurse in North America. He's signed in 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But that's not really giving you good data integrity. That means that someone signed in and left it wide open. So we really need to make sure that we ratchet back so that you know that it's Claire Riley signed in, or Chris McKay signed in, or whoever signed in next, so that person is actually tied to that bit of information. Therefore, you get a better data integrity, and certainly more importantly, you know where it can be tracked to. So if it does come up in an audit, if something was to happen, and look at, where you taking vital signs regularly, you have that information. As far as circumventing interoperability, we clearly see that we can waste a lot of time spinning wheels trying to get around some of the interoperability. There are some errors. If we don't have interoperability, we start doing some of the workarounds, whether that's writing your information down on a glove or putting it on a piece of paper. Some security risks there, safety issues there. Removing the need for credentials. These are tied to a bigger set of standards, and that would be HIPAA fines. And those have increased over the years too. When I first started, these were a $25,000, not that that's cheap in my book, but I mean, what they consider a slap in the wrist for some of these larger organizations. Now they're up to $1 million. So there are significant fines associated with this. And again, this would be giving people some unauthorized access to some devices. These are some of the challenges you face with some of the workarounds. When we think we're doing the right thing, we're putting a lot of people at risk, whether it be your organization, whether it be the patient, or whether it be yourself. So let's look at the variability. What is the best care for your care setting? So top consideration here when we're looking at this is we're looking at that there is a different workflow variability. You heard it from Claire earlier, whether it be in the ICU, whether it be an ER setting, whether it be home. There's a little bit of different workflow, whether it's, again, at the bedside, whether it's charting back at the desk. We did mention earlier about whether you require a second factor authentication. Some people, again, would want to make sure it's a PIN in the beginning of the day, make sure that you would make sure you're in charge of your badge the rest of the day, so they would have you do a second factor during that time frame. So that, again, gives you another security layer. These things we can make it customizable per organization, per hospital, what they want to set for that. I've seen everywhere from 6 hours to 13 hours to as few as 3 hours. And it's just really just to tighten down the security. And we call that as your grace period. So you allow the badge tap between then, the first time you tap in and whatever you set, 4 hours, and then again, it will ask you again for your badge tap. So if you think about it, you're asking for a PIN potentially twice, maybe 3 times a day, whereas we were signing in upwards of 50 times or more. So certainly we want to make sure that it still has the security balance along with the ease of use. You see the last bullet point here, we talk about break the glass. We certainly don't want to ever inhibit or take away from emergency care that's needed at the bedside. So we do have, again, some of that break the glass moments that we can talk about, whether it be during a code or, again, access to certain overrides on particular vital sign machine or a pump potentially. Claire, do you want to add anything along these considerations for the security strategies?
No, I think you've covered them well. And as you say, I talked earlier about the variabilities, the varying departments. The grace periods is a big one, and there's nothing set in stone. We have multiple facilities that have variable grace periods, again, dependent on the workflows and the environment that they're in. You alluded to radiology. They're a pretty unique area because those guys consider themselves, guys and gals, I should say, consider themselves in pretty much a locked environment in these dark rooms. So we have to balance security, what technology can offer, and what the operational rules and regulations are within each institution. And then the break the glass considerations, as Chris says, you know, there's technology should not and will not impede on patient care, patient safety coming first.
Great, thank you. So we're going to take a look at the integrated approach here on device access control. Really what we're trying to do is streamline this process and making sure that we bring Imprivatur into light in regards to some of the security workflows, and really whether it be to the device or at the user level. So we're looking to look at who is accessing and what's that control that we need there, what they're actually getting to. So what workflow visibility and when. So we really want to make sure that we're thinking about how we get to these devices. We had talked a little bit about, you know, some of the reformatted PHI on some of these devices. They're being accessed in a number of different ways. Certainly one of them was, someone just asked a question about it. I just want to bounce back to it a little bit. You know, this reformat can come in a number of different possibilities. One would be the pumps, as I mentioned. Again, it's not the typical way you see PHI, but you're now pushing that into the EMR. So that is a channel that can go in there. So that we list it as a reformatted type of PHI. Certainly the handheld devices, whether it be an Epic shop, Cerner shop, Allscripts shop, they all have these ties and links through these handheld devices that, you know, again, can be another format of how your EMR appears to you. And more importantly, we need to make sure that we can give them that same usability, whether it's who's accessing or what they're accessing, making sure that the time and in timely fashion we can do it with a badge tap, so that you have that same shared experience across all these devices, whether it be a pump, whether it be a handheld device, or whether it be your EMR. You guys are aware of the challenges. You've said it loud and clear with 60%. That's a pretty gleaming number when you ask for a poll. It tells me that you guys are having problems just getting in and getting day-to-day work done. So we want to make sure that we're really taking into consideration who, the what, and when we talk about getting in there. Claire, do you have some more to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it, and you're exactly right. You know, the who, the what, the where, and for how long. Let's not forget that as well. You know, when we talk of particular workflows, you know, how long are you in that PHI? How long are you in that workflow? What did you need? What did you have? So lots of measurable data to come out of, starting with what we try to call clean data.
That brings up a good point there, Claire. One of the things we see more with doctors and with nurses, they have this, they use dictation programs, whether it be Dragon or iModal, and there's a lot of pauses for that. So sometimes you have to build in some of those specific pauses, you know, inactivity timeouts, you know, because they're dictating for, you know, upwards of 3 to 4 minutes. And without that, you know, challenges we have. And that goes into play for nursing too. You know, when you think about some of the specialty cares that we mentioned earlier, we mentioned ICU, but think about a cath lab or an OR that you don't want those timeouts to be there. So there's considerations, some security settings that we can do with Imprivatur in our product that allows you to get in there and the when, as you mentioned, the time you are allotted to stay in there. So there's some good security settings around that. That's a great point, Claire. Thank you. So the next question we want to really kind of pose to you folks is really, what would you do with an extra 20 minutes? I mean, you know, we always say that we give this time back to you or put some time back on your calendar. And we, you know, hopefully it's not just to run out the door early. You know, really, we want to make sure that we're giving that back to the patient, because it really does make a difference. And certainly by tapping in and saving that time every time you're on a workstation, it can equate to about 10 minutes per shift. And that's, again, the conservative numbers of almost 30 times per shift. And typically with an 8-character type in and a username that's more difficult than I like to know, probably about 20 seconds. And if you ever change it, I always have that kind of brief seizure every time they change my password, that I have to remember that for the first time. If you take that away with a badge tap, it makes that so much easier. So really, what would you do with those 10 minutes? And then even think about this when we extend it to other devices. You know, during the course of a vital sign monitoring, you do your rounds, 7 minutes per shift. Again, that's being conservative with 20 times per shift. And then even a mobile device. So you're talking there a total of 20 minutes. And these are, again, edging on the side of being conservative. If we really put this to dollars and cents, you know, it's at an average cost, and we were very conservative with this, you're talking a lot of dollar savings and certainly more importantly, time savings. And where that goes back to you, whether you're seeing more patients with that, able to spend more time at the bedside, or you know, maybe it is doing better charting, getting out on time, so you're not going into overtime, getting back to your family. You know you need to take care of everyone else, and if it makes it easier here, I think it's really what our goal is. If we can save you that time. Claire, what would you do with 20 minutes?
Well, you know, I always talk about, you know, the ADLs that really get shortchanged in a lot of environments because of all the tasks we have to do. So, you know, that role in Nana, Granddad, changing diapers, lifting them, sitting bedside with them to simply give them a drink, to help feed them, sit and talk to family when they come in, sit and talk to the patient. There's a novel idea without having to spring between rooms and beds to keep up on top of yourself. So mine would be direct back to the patient if I had a fairy godmother and was being given the choice.
You do. It's called Imprivata. So we'd love to give that time back to you. Next slide, please. So right now, we'd like to open it up.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say we're going to open up the questions, and you can take it from there.
Exactly. Thank you both for that fantastic presentation. So we're both going to begin today's question and answer session. So please submit any questions you have by typing them into your control panel in the space labeled "Enter a question for staff" and clicking send. We will try to get through as many questions as we have time for. Our first question is, what is your recommendation for auto lock out times on devices like a vital signs monitor?
Ladies first, would you like to take that one?
Well, I was actually going to give that to you because I know this auto lock is coming in and the timeout and the grace periods, and obviously the biggest areas are the OR, which I know you have a passion for up there. So go ahead.
Great. So as I alluded to, some of the different workflows as far as auto timeouts, there's a standard that we try to abide by, which the EMRs are already set up. We're not going to change or alter them. So whether your timeout for your EMR is a 15, 20-minute, we would maintain those. Certainly, you know, whatever you're providing that on, whether it's Citrix or VM-based, they're going to have their timeouts too that we work with, and certainly we can work with those. I did mention some of the specialty areas. Claire just kind of mentioned it as well, with some of the ORs and cath labs that require a longer timeout. And certainly we take that in consideration. So as long as they're meeting your security standards for your hospital, we're willing to, you know, look at some of those auto log timeouts and be more adjusting and regarding that. Because again, it's really about the workflow and the people in it using it, so that we make sure that we're looking at those.
And if I could just add on to that, Chris, you just mentioned there with the EMRs, the Epics, the Cernums, the Allscripts, all the Meditechs, all the EMRs of the world. You're right, they do have their timeouts, but Imprivata does very well working cohesively with those timeouts and trying to optimize all at the same time. Because you may have an Epic timeout of 15 minutes and it might be right across the enterprise and it's just not working. So when we bring in Imprivata in, we like to look at the entire workflows and what the workflows involve. And obviously the huge part of that is EMR. So we try and work hand in hand and bring all stakeholders to the table to discuss what does an end user need to do during their daily shift or nightly shift for that matter.
Great, thank you both. Another audience member asked, do I need to lock down devices that are not network connected?
So the short answer to that is they do not need to be right now if they're not connected to EMR, but it is a security point as far as cybersecurity to get into. So again, you need to look at vulnerability. Certainly is one of the things you want to look at. and again, it is a pathway that can be open for that. So we want to make sure that we look at those. Now, that said, more and more of these devices are coming out with the smart capability to feed into the EMR. It's going to help the workflow overall, and that's not a bad thing for nursing. Again, it's taking that work and actually pushing it forward so that it can be signed off in the EMR by you in a much easier format than going and doing double the work by carrying it over there. So you're seeing more and more of these devices that are connected more than the ones that are not.
Great, thank you, Chris. Another audience member asked, can anyone else access an account with a card?
So the card itself is tied to you. You actually enroll in this, and it's tied to your Active Directory. So we use that leverage for your Active Directory so that you know that who's in the organization, who isn't. So again, once you're removed from that, you're removed from the one-sign appliance as well. And then the reason why not anyone can use it, we talked a little bit about it in regards to a PIN. So again, you can have the badge, but you'd also need the PIN to activate it for that grace period that we talked about, whether it be 2, 4, 6, 8 hours that your hospital sets. So once you have that, it gives you the ability to touch with the card yourself, and then at the end of the grace period, will prompt you for a PIN.
And if I can just add on to that, Chris, as well, we do have the ability, Chris talked to it earlier, of doing a second factor authentication, which if we do see that is most commonly a PIN number. But that is another open for discussion, because what we want is to streamline workflows. We don't want to make them a challenge, and we don't want to implement technology and drive a workaround workflow. So again, bring the stakeholders to the table, talking what the concerns are, what's happening today in your current environment, where do you see your challenges in the current environment. So there are ways, but it really is an open discussion with all stakeholders to see where we can get the best optimization of efficiency, including security in these workflows.
Excellent point, Claire, thank you. Another question we had was, what devices does Imprivata integrate with today to help with access controls?
So there is a list of them on our website that we have, and I don't want to leave anyone out, but I'll try to go a high overview of it. I know that we went to market with Capsule as far as a vital sign monitor. We went to market with Welsh Allen as well as Philips. I know we have from Med Cabinet Dispensing, some Ergotronic, and one other vendor, it's escaping me right now. And we are in discussion with some pump vendors, because we do know that these are certainly things that would also help streamline the process. So there is a full list on the Imprivata website as well. There was a follow-up question that we could go back to about people asked about the card swapping, or can they access with an account with a card, and would people swap cards? I could probably just dispel that if I could. Certainly, and again, just to reiterate, the question is the first, can anyone access with a card, was the initial question, and the follow-up was really, can people will swap cards? To Claire's point initially, I don't think it's a vindictive state. I don't think it's something that they're trying to do. I think they're trying to access quickly. And if you have your own badge, and again, it takes 0.4 seconds to get into your EMR, then there's no need to swap badges. And again, you have the data integrity. There's, will people swap cards? Again, potentially, if someone wants to access quickly, but they should have their own access. I mean, you shouldn't be giving access to EMR under you. There's already kind of a malicious intent there. So, there's a bigger problem if people are swapping cards to that level. So I would certainly, remember that if that's really a concern of your hospital, you can incite that they use a PIN every time, again, or shorten that security window. But there's security measures in place to even tighten those down if we need to. But again, I don't think we're doing it for the wrong reasons. We're doing it for the right reasons. So if we can make it seamless and easy to get into, that would be great.
Great, thank you, Chris. I believe that's all the time we have for today. I want to thank Claire, Christopher, and Imprivata for the excellent presentation, and to our audience for participating today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future webinars.
Thank you very much.